Biddy Mason. Bridget Biddy Mason, born October 1880, January 1891, was an African-American nurse and a California real estate entrepreneur and philanthropist. Bridget was given to or sold to Robert Mason Smith and his bride, Rebecca Dorn Smith, in the 1840s. According to some stories, she was given to the Smiths as a wedding present. She moved to the Mississippi plantation. Biddy was valuable to the Smiths because of her knowledge of medicine, child care, and livestock care. While on the Smith plantation, Biddy had 3 children. The father or fathers of her children are unknown. Some historians believe Robert Smith likely fathered at least one of her children. Missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Mormons, proselytized in Mississippi. They taught Smith and his wife and 6 children, and they converted in 1847. Slaves were only allowed to be preached to and baptized with their master's permission. According to the church policy, it is unknown whether Biddy was baptized. I assume she probably was, because my theory at this point is the early Mormon movement was joined by African American and indigenous citizens. It was a movement to attract these interracial citizens to settle the western part of the United States as a homeland and a place where these interracial citizens from America could live in peace. However, the banking oligarchs had a different idea and sent out their vigilantes, such as the Danites, the Mormon infiltrators that all started in Canada and came as Campbellites, were baptized from the Campbellite religion, and these were the infiltrators that ended up destroying this early Mormon movement of interracial settlers in the West. And again, my theory is that there is ample evidence to suggest that Joseph Smith and Hyrum Smith were both interracial, and I've shown you genetic proof of this, such as Hyrum Smith being part of the Moore Indian School out of Dartmouth. And I know I've been told that that was opened up to white children also, but how Native Americans that were born from white fathers were given that racial identification, even though they may have had a full-blooded Native American wife. That is what happened with Lucy Mack Smith's brother, who was identified as white by the government. He had children from a full-blooded Native American partner and made it his goal to marry her, because if he married her, his children, 3 offspring, would be identified as white and would have been able to inherit land from him and inherit his ample wealth, which he was very wealthy. He owned a fur trading company in Ohio, I believe. Even a town was named after Lucy Mack Smith's brother. But anyway, let's get back to Biddy. Church leader Brigham Young sent a group of Mormons to Southern California in 1851. Young instructed the group that California was a free state and their slaves would be free when they arrived. However, when the Smiths arrived with their slaves, Biddy, they did not free them but kept them. And when the Smiths decided to move to Texas, Biddy refused to move with them. There was a court case in which her children's husbands, married to 2 free black men, sued in court for Biddy's freedom. Biddy was freed when the Smiths did not turn up. What was interesting about the trial, though, is that Mr. Smith's defense was that Biddy was his plural wife. And so polygamy was used, it was a double-edged sword, and I'm going to propose this, that many of the southern plantations did in fact have children from their slaves, but they grew quite fond of them, such as Biddy, and looked at them as being part of their family. And so there was no real social boundary against race in early America, and there was a fluid interracial community. But Biddy ends up being freed from her master, who fought to keep her and in fact said that she was his wife. Or, as they said, polygamy was a cover for white slavery, where you could keep these women in captivity and call them your wives, which many of Brigham Young's wives were just consigned to drudgery in Salt Lake and never saw Brigham Young In practicality, in practice, they were indeed slaves, had no place to go. After becoming free, Mason and her daughters moved in with Robert Owens, the father of Charles Owens, a well-known Los Angeles businessman. Her daughter Ellen would eventually marry Charles Owens. Mason worked in Los Angeles as a nurse and midwife, delivering babies. During her career, using her knowledge of herbal remedies, she risked her life to take care of those that had smallpox. But when she was free, Bridget had no legal last name as a slave, and after emancipation, she chose to be known as Bridget Biddy Mason. This takes on the surname of Amasa Mason Lyman. Amasa Lyman was an early apostle and was a counselor in the first presidency to Joseph Smith, and I believe was African American interracial himself. I believe she took on the name of Amasa Lyman because she was probably one of Amasa Lyman's secret plural wives during this period of time, and he was her protector. And this shows her closeness. For the recent apostle, who's an offspring of Amasa Lyman, but definitely looks white. One of my cousins, one of the Virginia Jolliffes, coming out of the Joliffe genealogical book. John Joliffe was an anti-slavery lawyer who attempted to prosecute the kidnappers of Henrietta Wood in 1853. He worked with other area attorneys like Salmon Chase. Joliffe, together with James Burney, also defended George Washington McCleary, an enslaved man who had escaped from Kentucky in 1849 and is settled in Miami County, Ohio. In the case of Miller versus McCreary, that Ohio was the end port for the Underground Railroad. And here we have lawyers such as one of my cousins fighting in court to free these slaves that had escaped the South through the Underground Railroad, or the networks of ports and cities along the Mississippi that were used as cover for these escaping African Americans. As you recall, Quincy, an early Mormon outpost that invited the Mormons who were being chased out of Missouri. The Quincy was one of the stopping grounds or hubs on the Mississippi that was used as an Underground Railroad port. So was Keosauqua on the Ohio River, where Mike Jolly, Reuben Manning Jolly, is buried. So the Jollies were involved, as my theory states, so were the Mormons involved in assisting to free slaves who were escaping the South from slavery in this network of river cities and ports along the Mississippi and the Ohio River into Ohio, a stopping place where there would be lawyers and a community to help these escapees from the South. Anna Wood was a free African-American woman in Cincinnati who was tricked into entering Kentucky in 1853, where she was kidnapped and sold into slavery. Born a slave in Kentucky and owned first by the Toucey family, Wood was manumitted in 1840 by a Kentucky woman whose relatives disputed the legality of the manumission. Sir Code family for details. The younger family members accepted money from Zebulon Ward, who orchestrated Wood's kidnapping and sale to the Lavington slave traders. And this was occurring quite frequently, where free black Americans would be kidnapped and sold into slavery in the South. This is one of the reasons why the Underground Railroad was created, to assist freed, kidnapped slaves, free black Americans, free Native Americans who were kidnapped and sold into slavery, to assist them in their passage to the North, where they could hopefully document their own freed state and the fact that they had been sold into slavery illegally. An attempt by local abolitionists to stop the sale failed, and Wood was eventually sold to the Natchez, to Mississippi cotton planter. Just think of how horrifying this would be if you were a free black American and sold into slavery, and then you ended up with somebody like Gerard Brandon, who was known to be very, very wicked and a horrible slave master. She was removed to Texas in 1863 after the war. Wood brought suit against Ward for her kidnapping, asking $15,000 to $20,000 in damages and lost wages. In 1878, the U.S. court awarded her $2,500, upholding the lower court's decision in favor of Wood. $2,500 would have been quite a bit of money back then. Our plantation in North Carolina was sold for, something like $400. C. Wood versus Ward. She and her son Arthur H. Sims later settled in Chicago, where she died in 1912. This is such an interesting period of history, and it's been so covered up by the lily whitewashed history we've been presented, where white slavers are bad, all blacks are good, where it was fluid. Evil crosses racial boundaries. There were black slave traders that were kidnapping blacks and selling them to white slavers in the South, and vice versa.